In 1932, at the height of the Great Depression, the most devastating economic downturn in American history, the Ford Motor Company introduced a revolutionary new car and engine. The car and engine that I speak of are still as important today as they were over 80 years ago. And here at Deuceheaven, owned by Gene Hetland in Oak Grove, Minnesota, we're about to tell you the story of the 1932 Ford V8.
Well, I guess I'm kind of a detail man. The lines are so clean and everything has a space and a spot and everything blends nice. It's just a natural for a classic and it's a natural for a hot rod. I started collecting 32 Fords way back when I was a kid, I guess. One of my first cars was a 32 Ford. We made it into a hot rod, of course. That was my first love with the 32 Ford, and then I fell in love with the original.
All the credit has to be given to Henry Ford back at the turn of last century for his vision. It was a time period where America was being put on wheels, and nobody did it better, building cars that were rugged, and the cars were very inexpensive to purchase. It really started with the Model T, continued through the mid-1920s with the Model A, when things started to change for Ford Motor Company, and that was Chevrolet now jumped into it and became a real contender for #1 in sales. The big wild card for automobile sales in the 1920s was the Great Depression beginning in 1929, and despite the fact that it had a major impact on automobile sales, as it did with the economy of the rest of the country, it did not stop the interest in cars. America was really getting on board owning automobiles, and the technology continued to chug on despite a very, very difficult economic time. V8 engines were nothing new by the late 1920s, early 1930s, but they were unheard of in the low-price field. I think that old Henry Ford was very reluctant to get outside of the box of his beloved four-cylinder engine. But you have to understand that Chevrolet was overtaking Ford in sales with a pretty landmark engine design of their own. It was an inline six-cylinder engine, very reliable, very smooth, and the fact that Henry decided he was going to go ahead and develop what now that we know as the flathead V8 was really not within his comfort zone, but I think that deep down his instincts told him this is what we need to do to set us apart. So the big question was, how do you develop this engine to be able to build it in quantity where people could afford it? It was risky, it was wildly crazy expensive, but ultimately it worked out for Ford.
I think it saved Ford. The motor Henry developed and Edsel developed the design. And I think it's the design that carried on through all the years, because there's nothing that can come close to a 32 Ford.
The success of the Ford V8 was so strong that by the mid-1930s, that's all you could get in a Ford. They had a great V8 engine that buyers wanted, and it was roughly the same price as the Chevrolet competitor. By the mid-30s, Ford was #1 back in sales again.
The 1932 Ford gained in popularity, not so much to the everyday consumer, but to the GIs coming back from World War II who were looking to use their creativity that they had learned in the service to apply to the automobiles they drove. And so, the 32 Ford became the starting point for the hot rod industry.
They didn't have a lot of money necessarily. They were back home and they wanted to have some fun. And they may not be able to go out and afford a brand new car, but they could certainly afford to tinker with an old car. And there was no other car that was as sought after as that one specific year, the Deuce, the 32 Ford with a flathead V8.
I think the 32 Ford will probably never die as far as the hot rodders go. I mean, these cars are over 80 years old and they're still popular.
Really, it was the best blend of not only the performance of the first year V8, but also the styling of the car, very jaunty as it's been described, and also the light weight of the car.
If you spend a lot of time close to something, eventually you begin to resemble it. And I think in this instance, you can make that comparison between Gene Hetland and Henry Ford. Not so much in their personality, but more so in their commitment and their devotion and their unswerving dedication to one particular direction.
You come into this facility and Gene has put together the best blend of everything that might be connected with the 1932 Ford. Incredible parts supply, an original style showroom, so much memorabilia back from that era, and even an office that was inspired by Henry Ford himself. It is a literal trip back in time. I don't think that there's one specific car year from Ford Motor Company that really sets a stage for where they're at today and where they came from than the 1932 Ford. All of us that love cars have to really honor what Gene has been able to do to preserve what the significance of the 32 Ford is, not only from how important they are as a hot rod, but what a landmark, groundbreaking car that they were back in 1932 as well.
Gene Hetland's fabulous collection of 1932 Fords has helped us tell the story of one of the most important automobiles in history. And it's a sure thing that the 1932 Ford will be a car that people will admire and cherish for many years to come.